Hi, everyone. I'm Susan Henner. I'm an U.S. immigration lawyer specializing in work visas, employment visas, and humanitarian visas for her clients. I'm located here in White Plains, New York, and I'm here with Elizabeth Long, who's a Canadian immigration lawyer.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I am located in Toronto, Canada. Our law firm, Law Group, works with people who want to come up to Canada and stay in Canada, and we do all areas of Canadian immigration law. Today, we wanted to provide some options to those of you who are currently in the States, whose you may have status currently, but maybe your status may be running out soon. And we wanted to look at some options from both sides of the border for those of you who are being in that situation.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So I have a lot of clients who are coming to me lately and who are in a situation where they have legal status here, such as parole or humanitarian parole or temporary protected status, which is due to expire very soon, and they're looking for options. Can you think of any options that you may be able to offer to these clients?
So in Canada, there are various options for people who may want to come up to Canada on a temporary basis, such as studying or working in Canada, or for people who can apply for permanent residence. For the most part, there are much more options for people who come to Canada first to study or work. And to study, you'll have to be accepted to a university or college in Canada. Or for the work permits, for the most part, likely need to have some sort of job offer in Canada. Now, sometimes you can combine that. So, for example, international students, if you've studied in Canada, you can obtain an open work permit to work in Canada afterwards. And from there, we can move on to looking at permanent residence. Permanent residence in Canada, we have a points-based system called express entry. That's one of the main ways that people apply for permanent residence. And it'll depend on your background. You don't necessarily need to have an employer assist you, or we don't have the employer sponsorship like we do in the United States. But we do look at backgrounds.
So, what type of background would someone need to have in order to qualify under this point system?
There are a whole series of different factors. So age, for example, is important. You'll have people who are in their 20s or early 30s who have the best chance, their highest points there. Language is very important. Not only fluency in English, but French is very, very important. If you can speak French and you have a high fluency, and we're looking at not only speaking, but speaking, listening, reading, and writing in all four areas, then if you score well on that exam and you score well in some of the other factors like high skilled work experience, education, if you have all of those kind of factors and you speak French, then we may be able to apply for permanent residence no matter where you are in the world. Otherwise, if you don't speak French but you're fluent in English, and especially if you've had work experience in Canada, that could also get you into the group to be competitive to get permanent residence. Or if you work in an in-demand occupation, such as different occupations in healthcare, or different occupations in education, or other kinds of occupations that the government has identified that we need in Canada, then you might have a good chance to apply for permanent residence if you're not already in Canada.
And do the people who are applying, do they actually take a test for the languages?
Yes, we have certain tests like the IELTS or the CELPIP or PTE for English. And for French, there is the TEF, TEF, or TCF exams.
Another question we get asked a lot is I have clients here who have status which is running out on visas such as an H visa or an L visa. They've reached the end and their
Yeah.
employer has not yet sponsored them for the green card or doesn't want to sponsor them. Are there options for those employees to come to Canada at this point?
Yes, for a lot of people in these kind of circumstances, if their employers have a Canadian division, then we might be able to transfer them up to Canada. Or even if they don't currently have, they want to start a Canadian division, it's not too difficult to do that as well in Canada. We can certainly help them do that. Otherwise, if you don't have an employer who wants to offer you a position, then the study option becomes a very viable solution for many people. Where if you study, for example, if you were to study in a master's program, then also your married spouse or even common law. We have something where we recognize people who have lived together for a year in a conjugal relationship is the same status as someone who's married. So you can bring your common law spouse up to Canada as well, and they can get open work permits. And in Canada, we also have our government healthcare program as well. And so spouses of workers and the workers themselves and children can also get healthcare, and the children can also go to public school for free.
How do you prove that you're a conjugal spouse of someone that you've been together for 1 year?
When we're applying for these work permits, it's not as stringent as spousal sponsorship, where we have to have letters from family and friends and etc. and photos, etc. It's not as much. Basically, we've showed that you lived in the same residence for at least a year and that you're not just roommates, you actually share a life together.
What about options for someone who has applied for asylum here or some type of humanitarian relief in the United States and has their application has been sort of pre-termitted here? Like the government says, oh, well, this is a new thing that's happening here in the United States where we'll walk into a hearing and the government says, well, we have agreements with Uganda or Honduras or Ecuador, so we're not going to hear your case here, but you're going to go to one of those countries and have them hear your case. And the person says to me, well, I don't want to go to those countries. Do they have an option to apply for asylum or humanitarian relief in Canada? And if so, what would be that process like?
In Canada, we currently have something called the Safe Third Country Agreement with the United States. So for those people who passed through the US, you can't just make a refugee claim if you come through and go to the border in Canada. And also, in order to come up to Canada, for many people, you'll have to apply for a visa to come up to Canada. And one of the main indices to an officer when someone is applying for a visitor visa, or if you're applying for a work permit or study permit, these are all temporary residence applications. They would be looking at whether or not you would leave Canada when your authorization ends. So unfortunately, for people who have made refugee claims or who are without status in that country, a lot of these temporary residence applications will likely be rejected. However, for permanent residents, that's not an issue. And so for those people who, for example, speak French, are highly educated, have work experience, even if you had made a refugee claim that may be rejected, that's okay. If you qualify for the permanent residence, we can still apply for permanent residence.
But that person needs to have maintained legal status in the US or no?
No, in that situation, we're okay.
How long does this process take if I have someone here who wants to say try to apply for the residency in Canada under one of these employment bases?
For work permits, it really depends on a person's nationality. If they need a visa normally to come to Canada, we'll need to apply at the visa post. If they're in the States and they have legal status, sometimes the work permits might take 2 months to 4 months to process. For permanent residents, they need to be selected. They need to be invited to apply. Once they've been invited to apply, the normal processing time after you submit the application is around 6 months for permanent residents. How about the US? What happens for people if they don't have or their status is about to expire on, let's say, the H-1B visas? What are some options there?
Well, we've been looking for options. So certain options are to change to another type of visa. So that could be either, like you say, a student visa, or they could switch over to a visitor visa if they just need more time to figure out what they're going to do next. Sometimes we have a green card in process and we're just waiting for that to finish up. So in certain instances, we'll recommend they could go wait abroad for a few months if we know they're going to be coming back pretty soon. So those are other options for our clients. Other clients choose to open their own businesses. We have the
Oh,
E2 visa option. So I love doing those. That's
yeah.
for a company who wants to open a U.S. business. Any country that the U.S. has a treaty with under this trade agreement, we have to look up and see which country those are. And if they're going to invest a substantial amount of capital, they would open a US company here, incorporate here, or set up the company how they wish, and then they could get sponsored as long as the business is already opened and running or is ready to commence business immediately. Basically, there's a series of requirements such as, we recommend a bank account and a lease, et cetera, and show the government that, hey, we're ready to get started. We're ready to commence business in the US. They could be granted an E2 visa under those circumstances. And I love them and they're great.
Should people start thinking about that right away then? Because it might take some time to establish the business.
Yeah, because you're going to open a bank account, you're going to put money in the bank account. You have to show where that money came from, that it came from lawful means. That's what our government wants to see. And you really have to prove that the business is ready to commence business and start running. Another visa, which I love, is the O1 visa. And these are for extraordinary ability aliens, someone who's talented in their particular field, someone who's an entertainer. I do a lot of these visas and we love working with these clients. We have like a marathon runner, a sculptor, an artist, a Broadway musician, an actor, and they're able to sponsor themselves either through an employer or through an agent. So, which is nice because then they could work for many different companies, employers, or jobs while they're here in the US on that visa. And sometimes that's a great visa to look at for someone who has a particular talent in their fields.
Fantastic. How long are these old visas taking to process?
Right now, we're seeing about 6 to 8 months, but there is a premium fee you could pay, and they will
Mhm.
process it within 3 or 4 weeks or so.
Oh, wow.
So you can expedite those and get them done pretty quickly. It's just a lot of paperwork. We do need to show, there's different categories you fall in. For example, you want to show national acclaim, you want to show articles written about you, any prizes, awards. So you have to fall into at least three of these categories to prove your extraordinary ability. I love doing them and they're just great.
You meet
Yeah,
extraordinary people that way.
we do. We do.
I've heard that there are a lot of people who are currently on temporary protection status, is it TPS? And these are going to be, there's talk of that those being canceled. Is there anything that you can do for people who are in that status?
We've been working on these. A lot of them are coming up for clients from Venezuela, clients from Haiti. The TPS has not been renewed. And there has been a lot of litigation in the federal courts. Is there an injunction? Is there not an injunction? So as of now, they're set to expire. So with those persons, I would say for sure, if there's a reason they can't go back to their home country, a lot of people are applying for asylum now. And something that people may or may not know, when you're on TPS, if you have not yet filed for asylum, there's certain exemptions of the timeline where you needed to file for asylum. That timeline may have been told and excused. The best suggestion is to consult with your immigration attorney and see if you're eligible, why to file for asylum. But you have to show not just that everything's bad in my country, you have to show that you would personally have an issue, a well-founded fear of persecution if you were to return on the basis of your race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a social group. You can't just say, oh, things really terrible in Venezuela, I can't go back. You have to show that the minute I get off that plane, I will be targeted for one of these reasons and why.
We've seen so much in the news about ICE going around and asking people for their ID and such. What can people sort of do to try to protect themselves as much as possible against like being detained if they're in the States these days?
Carry your identification or a copy of it. Make sure if you're in status that you have a copy of your work permits. If you filed for extensions, copy of your receipt notices. Make sure that you have friends or family who know where you are at all times, Be careful with travel, be careful at the airports for sure. We're recommending people just stay in touch with their family members as well so that someone always knows where they are if they have to travel for work or other reasons. And if you are stopped by ICE, be polite, be nice, but know that you do have rights. You're welcome to say you have a lawyer and ask to call that lawyer. Make sure that you are well aware of your rights, but at the same time, we don't want people getting hurt or fighting back or being belligerent. So it always pays to be polite and just validate that, yes, I'm here legally, or yes, I have a case pending and here's my case number.
And what about people who are thinking, well, I'd like to travel, go on vacation, see my family, etc., and leave the country right now? Any thoughts or advice?
Especially for people who are new residents and have not traveled before. Anyone who has ever been arrested for anything, even like minor criminal violations, check with your lawyer before leaving. Don't just get on the plane and leave. I've had several people who thought, oh, well, my case was dismissed, or oh, I'm only on probation, or oh, my case was 20 years ago. On the way back in, they're stopped at the airport because and detained. And then it's a whole process to try and get them released. Definitely check before you get on that plane. Everyone wants to see their family, but at this point, you definitely want to be sure. And also, if you're eligible, file for citizenship. It also takes a lot of the burden off. You can't be deported right now if you're a US citizen. So where people are eligible, we're suggesting that they file their applications sooner rather than later.
And for US citizens, if you want to come up to Canada, many of the options that I spoke about before would apply to you. But for a lot of American citizens, we actually have a brand new law in Canada that was passed just before Christmas. If you have Canadian ancestry to any level, whether it's your great great grandparents, and you can prove that relationship, then you are a Canadian right now.
You have dual citizenship between Canada and the US,
Yeah,
according to Canadian.
Canada is fine with it. How about the US?
Yeah, I think we're
Yeah,
okay with it.
for now anyway,
For
right?
now, we'll see how things move on.
Hopefully that provides you guys some with ideas about different things that you can do. And if you have a case, then you really need some representation to let us know, and we'll certainly be here to help you out.